Anthony Scaramucci, welcome.
Hey, it's great to be here, Greg. Thank you for having me.
And I see in my research you called the mooch.
Yeah, I mean, some of the liberals thought that was a pejorative, but that's the third syllable of my last name. And I had a very politically incorrect German phys ed teacher, and he didn't like kids that had four-syllable last names. So he picked one syllable, and you got stuck with that for the rest of your life. So the third syllable of my last name, Scaramucci, became my nickname since 1972.
Don't worry, it's a good one. I like it.
I've been called a lot worse, I can tell you that, Greg.
Anthony, investment banker, lawyer, director of communications to the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump. That's a pretty good CV.
You didn't mention I got fired though, Greg. You could have thrown that in there. Everybody knows. But hey, listen, I grew up in a blue collar neighborhood. So my dad, when I got my job at Goldman, when I graduated from Harvard Law School, and I got my job at Goldman, I'll never forget what my dad said to me. He said, "I never want to hear you complain about your job." And I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Well, you're indoors, you're out of direct sunlight, and there's no heavy lifting. So I never want to hear you about it." My dad was a laborer. He was an hourly worker. It didn't stop me from complaining about my job, but it did set the right expectations in terms of gratitude and being very grateful for things,
Anthony, look, I've got to ask the question, of course. Tell us about working with Donald Trump. What was it like working in the White House? Look, I know it only lasted 11 or 12 days, but you had a real good look behind the curtain. Tell us about the White House. That's pretty good on the CV.
Well, if it's okay, I want to start during the campaign because I think, I worked for Mr. Trump for almost a year during the campaign. I was also one of his media surrogates. And whether you like Donald Trump or not, and obviously him and I have is separated and have a difference of opinion at this point in our lives. But I will say this about him: he had great political instincts. He saw something happening in our country. Perhaps it happens in Australia. It certainly has happened in the UK, where a generation of working class people have felt left out of the system. And so I'll speak for my family for a moment. I grew up in a aspirational working class family. And I would say over 35 years through globalization, all these political forces, et cetera, this working class aspirational family have sort of converted into economically desperational ones. And so President Trump saw that, and he got ahead of that in 2016. And I think that the Democrats and the other Republican elites, if you will, did not see that. And so I always will give him credit for that. But I think where the president lost his way is when he got into the White House. He took a very defensive, almost insecure posture. And so by the time I got to the White House in July of 2017, it was like a shootout at the OK Corral was going on. There were 3 or 4 different factions inside the White House. There was the Steve Bannon faction, the Reince Priebus faction, and the Jared Kushner faction. But I was alarmed by that because there wasn't a President Trump faction. These guys were shooting at each other in like a Mexican standoff. And so he hired me. He called me. I had said to him, "Listen, I'm not fans of Bannon and Priebus, and they're going to give you a hard time." He called me and said, "I'd like you to come down here and fix it." Of course, I made my series of mistakes. But, one thing I'm very proud of is Bannon. When I was fired, Bannon got fired right alongside of me. General Kelly, who became a very close friend of mine, would tell you that Steve was fired on the same day, but he begged Kelly not to have him be blown out of the White House with me on that day. So they gave him a 2-week reprieve. But I think that really helped the country because Trump and Bannon together, that would have been a very nasty combination during COVID. But, listen, I flew Air Force One 3 times. I did the White House press conference in front of about 50 million people. And I spent a lot of time with the president in the Oval Office when I was there. And I will say this, and I'm sure you'll get this, and so will your listeners and viewers, Greg. The hardest job in the world wouldn't even describe it. If you just read the presidential daily brief, and I had a White House security clearance, you would be blown away by the magnitude of the dilemmas and the situations and the decisions. And I'll just say this one last point. You're the president of the United States. That means 5,000 other people in that government could not make the decision. And it's on your desk And it's a choice between this is going to be a really bad outcome or possibly a really bad outcome. And some of it is luck. And so I'm reluctant to sometimes overly criticize these people, because once you're in the situation, you see the hot soup that they're actually in.
Mm. Look, you got fired. Is there anything you'd do differently?
Well, listen, I talked to a reporter I trusted. He was from my hometown. He was an Italian kid from my hometown whose father worked with my dad on the same construction site. And I made a very flippant, off color, although I'll say this, if you look it up on Google, the Australians would love the comment. It was probably inappropriate for the masses, but it was a comment I made to a friend with great jocularity. But he took it as an opening. He was recording the conversation, and that's my fault. That's amateur hour on my part, frankly. I should have never trusted him despite my 2-decade relationship with him. And so I probably would have done that differently, but not a lot, frankly, other than that, what I have done differently, and here's the thing I would say to people. I got fired and I accepted my responsibility in it. I didn't blame anybody for my firing other than myself. I was fully accountable for the mistake that I made. But I will say this, and I think this is a cautionary tale for people. My wife hated Donald Trump almost as much as Melania Trump hates Donald Trump. I mean, it's like right up there, and she told me not to take the job. And I didn't listen to her. I let my pride and my ego get the better of me, Greg. And I'll tell you that was a big mistake. And I think ultimately my cautionary tale, when I speak in front of students and things like that, I always tell people, beware of your pride and your ego, because sometimes you'll make decisions based on that. I was a blue collar kid, went to Tufts and Harvard, built a couple successful businesses. Now I got the chance to work for the American president. And even though it probably wasn't the right fit, I was hitting the override switch as a result of my pride and ego. And I would just warn people not to do that. Every time I've done that in my life, it's cost me something, Greg. So,
well, you may have got sacked and you're only there for a short period of time. You certainly made an impact because your name and your face and your style is known around the world. And we've certainly got a lot of you here in Australia. So that's pretty good impact. And I heard
it's accidental, Greg. I have to confess that to you, and I love your country. I've spent a lot of time in your country over the last decade. I've been up to Hayman Island. I've been on Sanderson Beach. I've been to the Gold Coast. Obviously, I've sipped the coffee in those great coffee bars in Melbourne. And before we went on the air, we were talking about tall poppy syndrome. It's very important to be self-aware, and it's very important to check your ego at the door when you're making investment decisions and career decisions. But a lot of that stuff was accidental, to be totally candid.
Well, they say that there's not small parts, there's only small actors, and you certainly proved to be a big player with a small part. So congratulations. Look, let's get down. What are you doing now, and especially in your crypto space? That's what the people want to hear. So give us a bit of a quick snapshot of you right now.
Well, and I'll be brief, but when I left the White House, it became clear to me that these currencies were going to digitize. Fiat currencies, the Chinese yuan will be digital. Eventually, I believe the United States will digitize its dollar. And so the first thing I did when I returned to my firm, Skybridge Capital, I was the founder and managing partner. I think that's one of the best things about it. If you get fired from the White House and you own your own firm, Greg, you can go back to your own firm. You don't get canceled from society. So the first thing I did was I bought the URL skybridgebitcoin.com, and then I wrote in my diary, if Bitcoin got to 100 million wallets, if I became comfortable with the storability of it, meaning I wasn't worried about getting hacked, and I had a benign feeling about regulation in the US related to digital currencies, I'd become an investor. And all of that probably happened in the middle of last year. And so right alongside of Michael Saylor, the CEO of MicroStrategy, we started investing in Bitcoin. And I own Ethereum now. I own another coin called Algorand. I just wrote a book, by the way. I'll hold it up. It's an international bestseller. And if you don't believe me, you can come into my basement and I'll show you every copy I bought to make it an international bestseller. I don't think anyone's ever bought a copy of any of my books, but I wrote this book about Bitcoin in the middle of the summer, and I released it about a month ago. It is a great summary. And what I'll do is you send me your address and I'll send a big batch of them down there. I got to get them out of my basement anyway, Greg, because my wife's upset with all the storage that this thing is taking up. But I thought it was very important, and it's a short book. I thought it was very important to just explain to my investors what Bitcoin is, how the blockchain works, the representation of all of that. And we own right now, as you and I are speaking, at current market prices between Bitcoin and Ethereum, Skybridge Capital owns about $1 billion of digital assets today. And that's mostly born from great appreciation. We probably put $200 or $250 million to work middle to late last year. It's now grown to just over $1 billion.
Wow, that's fantastic. Look, let's go back 20 months ago. And of course, COVID was arriving. I had a number of great experts on my show. I had Robert Kiyosaki and
Sure.
Harry Dent and Jim Rickards, and the list goes on. These gentlemen, who are very, very wise economists, they've been around a long time, but they all said to me, Greg, there's going to be a great depression coming on, and we can't dodge it. Now, here we are 20 months later. And what have we seen? We saw airlines shut down. We saw hotels shut down, cafes shut down, shops shut down. People had to stay at home for 4 or 5 months here in Australia. We saw horrible, horrible things. But the economies walked straight through it. We aren't anywhere near a Great Depression here in Australia and New Zealand and Asia. What happened?
Well, first of all, I think every one of those gentlemen that you mentioned are super smart guys, esteemed guys. I've learned a lot from all three of them. And it was specifically Harry Dent's analysis of demography. But I think what they have a tendency to miss, and I would caution everybody, is that we think linearly about the world, but the world is happening exponentially. And I'll give you just a vivid example. In the 1840s, the British economist Tom Malthus said, we're in a lot of trouble. We're growing our population exponentially, but we can only grow the food linearly, a result of which we're going to start starving. And he missed the technological move in agriculture. And as it turns out, and you and I both know this, we have more issues related to obesity than we do starvation 200 years later. And I think what happens sometimes is you look at something linearly and you say, well, this has to fall off the cliff. In Rickard's case, he's really a big student of currencies and the devaluation of currencies. And we've certainly done that. And I'm happy to explain all that. And Kiyosaki would say the same thing. But I think what they're missing is while that's happening, we have this enormous exponential growth in technology, which is improving our societies. We're actually greening the society with eco-friendly things like electric cars and more solar and wind power. Our computers are moving faster. Our chips are faster. This sort of technology is bringing us closer together, us talking here on this conference call, this video call. And so what happened was a combination of things. The Fed and the induction of reserve money into the system and that tremendous amount of liquidity, and our ability to quickly move to a remote work application during COVID without really missing a beat, at least in the white collar jobs. Unfortunately, jobs that need hands, waiters, waitresses, service people, they got hit harder, unfortunately. But I think that's the thing that people miss. I'm unbelievably optimistic about the future because I see this exponential arc of technology. And I would just caution people not to think linearly because you can grow pessimistic if you think linearly because there's some bad vectors. But we should be able to solve a lot of these problems with technology, frankly. And I think that's some of the things these guys have a tendency to miss.
Well, fair enough. And look, the big news, of course, the American regulators have given the green light for ETFs. This is a big deal, isn't it? The institutions now playing in this arena. So what does it mean? How quickly will this impact the marketplace?
Well, I think it's already impacting the marketplace. I mean, I can give you the spot price right here. I have it. We've gone through the all-time high on Bitcoin. Obviously, Ethereum is tracking up and some of the other coins as well. And I think what basically, that was a seismic moment today. This morning, when that bell rang and that futures ETF traded, I told people that was that rate limiting step. If you study chemistry, we were at 211 degrees Fahrenheit or 99.9 degrees Celsius. And then this morning at 9:31 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we started boiling. We went from liquid to gas. And you could see that the world now recognizing the largest economy, or at least, tied for the largest perhaps, but the largest Western free capitalist economy, democratic system economy is accepting Bitcoin and is going to allow for regulation, but it's going to allow for Bitcoin to exist. And that's going to be a dramatic seismic change in the appetite that people are going to have for Bitcoin. And I tried to tell my investors that a year ago. I said, this will eventually become an ETF. And by that time, the shares will be, or the price of the coins will be much higher. Let's get in now as a group. And as that starts to unfold, that will be great news for Bitcoin, but let's be early. Let's be in the early wave of this thing, which is why we entered the space well over a year ago.
Of course, the Chinese president, he has turned around and banned cryptocurrency as we know it. Will this help or harm the mainstream crypto as we see it right now in the Western world?
Well, listen, I mean, to be fair, it harmed it. It obviously caused a correction in Bitcoin earlier in the year. I would say that it harms it, but negligibly going forward. They've banned Google, they've banned Facebook. They've shut down 2/3 of the internet. They're censoring it. They have a tendency to crack down on billionaires that they think are getting too big for their britches. And China, whether we like China or we dislike China, China represents in a lot of ways a difficult situation for the West because they've got concentration camps with the Uyghur community. They're suppressing freedoms in Tibet. The 90 or so million people that represent the Chinese Communist Party are trying to glue down and glue shut a very amazing civilization. So banning Bitcoin makes total sense because Bitcoin represents liberty. Bitcoin represents libertarianism. It represents freedom, mobility of your capital. And the Chinese are really trying to control all that. I predict that won't be a great outcome for them politically. I would just point out to your people that one-party systems have a 70 or so year life expectancy. It's actually below human life expectancy of 78 years. And what happens is they topple due to the heavy-handedness. That would be the Soviet Union, 70-year life expectancy. The Mexican one-party system ended after 70 years. You guys know that in Malaysia, they had a one-party system for about 70 years. That ended about 3.5, 4 years ago. And so the Chinese are in overtime now. And I would call for them to think about more reforms and giving their citizens an opportunity for more freedom. I don't know why they're so concerned about that because, in the West, I think the elites have done a pretty good job of managing that for themselves in terms of staying in power. I don't really see how that would cripple the Chinese Communist Party if they allowed for more freedom of expression. But, Bitcoin's banned for now. But as you know, they keep announcing that they've got to ban Bitcoin. Every 6 months, they send out another announcement, Bitcoin's banned. That's because Bitcoin is on USBs in China. Bitcoin is seeped into their system, whether they like it or not. Maybe they took down the miners, but you're not going to see Bitcoin go away. You have over 180 million wallets globally. If Kathy Wood is right, there'll be 1 billion wallets by the end of 2025. And China will have to accept some form of that digital currency, whether they like it or not.
Mm. Look, China, could this be opening the door for them to create their own crypto currency, which I think you alluded to just earlier? Is this their moment?
Yes, I think they will eventually have their own blockchain. I think what they're trying to figure out is they need that blockchain to be impregnable. Just imagine, God forbid, if they launched a blockchain-based digital currency that somehow got hacked. Okay. Now, they don't want to use a Western backbone. They don't want to use the backbone of an Algorand or an Ethereum So they're going to have to develop it on their own. I think that's why it's taking longer than people expected. But I mean, just imagine the social power of having your own digital yuan. You've got all this artificial intelligence now in the society overlooking people. You've got all of these cameras everywhere. You could set a social score for people. And if their money was on their phones or easily traceable, you could lift the money from them if they weren't doing things that you liked. And so this could be a great force of social control for the Chinese Communist Party. So I predict it will happen, but I think one of the reasons why it's been delayed is they're trying to create their own system, not using the backbone of some of the other systems that have already been created.
But isn't one of the secrets exposed about cryptocurrency is that it is freedom, it's not regulated. If China tries to develop their own framework, which has regulation, which has all the hairs and warts, all things attached by the Central Bank of China, surely it won't have the same secret.
Yeah, see, I think you're right where their policy dilemma is. I think you're right in the crosshairs of why they haven't deployed this thing, because you let the genie out of the bottle, it may not work out the way you originally intended. You know, there's all these unintended consequences of things. You know, you give people freedoms and then they start speaking out against the government, they crack down on the freedoms. You know, you and I are old enough to remember the Tiananmen Square situation. They were relaxing at that time. Deng Xiaoping was in a mode of growth. You'd gone from 79 to 89. You were creating an economic miracle. Obviously, the country was still not fully urbanized and there was a lot of poverty, but they were moving towards a more open society. And of course, when that happened, the symbolic Statue of Freedom or the Statue of Liberty, effectively in Tiananmen Square, and the movement by the students scared the daylights out of the Chinese Communist Party. And of course, they cracked down on it pretty hard, and we are where we are today. And I think all of us in the West have to look back on a lot of our actions. You know, we let them into the World Trade Organization. We didn't give them certain conditions precedent to get into the World Trade Organization. We allowed them, Richard Nixon made the decision to allow them to tie the renminbi or the yuan to the US dollar, recognizing that we were going to devalue to meet our deficit payments. And that was going to have a positive exporting effect for China. And I think we didn't put enough conditions on them in hindsight. And so that's why we have a nuclear sub deal with your country. You know, we're trying to play catch up right now, frankly.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the Beatles, because the Beatles come out of the UK and they had their own secret and they had their own recipe. And then America, God bless America, they created the Monkeys. They wanted to create, but it never had the it factor, did it? They didn't get there. And the Beatles were the Beatles. And I relate, that's Bitcoin. It's Bitcoin. And, you know, one of the big secrets for crypto or Bitcoin over the last 12 years is it's not regulated. So if the USA and other countries do regulate it, will this harm? I've been involved in financial services for 35 years, and we actually regulated the industry many, many years ago. It's been a progression, but it actually brought the industry up 3 or 4 levels, just by the way. But I don't know if that could happen quite here.
Yeah. Well, I can only give you my opinion, sir. I think it will help it. I don't see it harming it. It's reminiscent to me of the junk bond market in the US back in the early 80s when Michael Milken, he sort of developed that market in the late 70s. It was starting to mature in the early 80s, and there was big speculation at the SEC, what were they going to do with the junk bond market? And ultimately, they accepted it. You know, somebody said to me, well, why are you so confident that the regulators, this is a year ago, I might add, why are you so confident the regulators are going to accept it? Because there's something about the American people. You know, the regulators may not want it, but the American people want it. And I'll give you an example. The regulators wanted to shut down Uber, you know, the car sharing, the ride sharing service. And so they were making a push to shut down Uber. But, you know, there were 75 million people that were using Uber. And, you know, Greg, the people wanted it. And so once the people wanted it, it was sort of overwhelming. And I'll just point out that with 46 million wallets or owners of Bitcoin in the US, these senators were trying to put some legislation or verbiage in that infrastructure bill 2 months ago, and they got hit with a decentralized lobbying force, a bee swarm akin to like Wall Street bets. And it was pretty nasty for those senators. And so they pulled back. And 2 short months later, we're trading a Bitcoin future. Now, why are we trading a Bitcoin future and not a cash Bitcoin? It has to do with the fact that the CFTC has been regulating the Bitcoin futures market for the last couple of years. And so Gary, from a price discovery perspective, Gary Gensler, our SEC chairman, the commissioner, thinks that that's the best thing to do. It's a sloppy way to do it. You know that, and I know that, because there's arbitrage opportunities between the cash market and the futures market, that if that ETF gets very big, there could be some hedge funds in there disrupting and trying to pick up some spread there. I would like to just see a cash ETF at this point, but I think we're a ways away from that. I don't think he's ready to bring that out yet.
You were so right. What the people want, the people get, and it always wins down right through history.
Yes, I believe that even in a autocratic nation, ultimately, if the people have given up on the government, the flag comes down and a new flag shows up. It's just the way it's worked over the last 5,000 years.
Now, look, Jim Rickards, who you've already spoken, you have great respect for Jim, and certainly our listeners and viewers have always given him tremendous respect. But he did make an outrageous comment on my show last year, and this year actually. He said that we are all going to wake up one day and cryptocurrency and Bitcoin will disappear.
Yeah. Well, listen, people get things wrong. I mean, if you had me on your show long enough, I could give you a phone book of things that I've gotten wrong in my career, political assessments, business assessments. I mean, I don't know why I'm confessing this to everybody, but it's a sign of my ignorance. I had the chance to invest in Uber at a $25 million valuation. And I looked at Zach, who was running it. I said, well, wait a minute, you're going to have a car pick up my daughter, and it's a black car. I don't know the guy driving it, and they're going to take her to her location. He said, oh, yes. I said, well, I'm never going to let my daughter use that. And I kicked the guy out of my office. And so I probably left $50 to $100 million on the table. And by the way, the largest part of my American Express bill from my daughter is her Uber rides everywhere. So I got that completely wrong. And so I would never pick on Jim for missizing something or getting something wrong. I think what happens, though, and in Jim's case, or somebody like Peter Schiff or Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger, what I would say is, if you've gotten it wrong, it goes back to my pride and ego thing. Don't let your pride get in the way of the flexibility of your intellect. If you've gotten something wrong, shift gears. I don't know if you have time for this. Can I tell a quick story? Because I think it's instructive.
We have time.
Okay, so I'll tell you a quick story. It's 1999. I'm at the Allen and Company Media Conference. It's a who's conference, and felt very grateful to be invited. And on stage making a presentation was a gentleman by the name of Jeff Bezos. And he was talking about this company that he founded, Amazon.com. And he explained that he was shipping books in the beginning because these books are easy to ship. They're roughly the same size. He was trying to get the logistics down. And he said he was guaranteed over the next 5 to 7 years to lose money, because he was going to be spending his time on building infrastructure and marketing and network so that he could scale his business. And I took copious notes. I thought the guy was brilliant. Warren Buffett spoke right after him. And so this is 22 years ago. So Mr. Buffett was probably 69 at the time. They said that was a very intelligent presentation by Mr. Bezos, but I'm not buying any of that. He's losing money, and I can't value that. And oh, by the way, this is worth more than Sears Roebuck, which actually has brick and mortar stores. And I don't see how he's going to be able to make it or pull this off. And we fast forward, and I'll just give you these statistics. I think they're instructive. In the case of Amazon, if you bought the IPO on May 5th of 1997, a $10,000 investment in Amazon is now worth $21,140,000 US. However, you would have had to gone through 8 periods of time where you lost at least 50%. and one period of time where you lost 85. That was right after the global financial crisis. And Mr. Buffett got that wrong. Jeff ended up shooting himself into space in his own rocket, and he's neck and neck with Elon Musk to be the richest person on the planet. So very, very smart people can get things wrong. That doesn't mean they're not great investors and they don't have very high batting averages of success. And so I think Jim's got this wrong. I think Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett have this wrong. And what I would encourage them to do is do the homework, because when you get Ray Dalio to do the homework, the very famous hedge fund manager from Bridgewater, he buys Bitcoin. When you get Paul Tudor Jones or somebody like Stan Druckenmiller, the hedge fund manager that now owns the New York Mets, Steve Cohen, when they do the homework, they end up buying Bitcoin. They end up making it part of their investment strategy. And so I just think Jim has this wrong. And it's not to pick on him or anything like that, because I've gotten my share of things wrong. But to really understand the blockchain, sir, it is a delayering mechanism for our economy. And once you understand that it can take out the middleman and the idea that we can have these permissionless transactions with each other, that is such an exponential opportunity for people. Mark Andreessen said that the blockchain is bigger than the web browser that he invented in 1995, just to see the magnitude of what can happen with the blockchain. And
Wow.
so for me, you got to understand it. And once you understand it, I think it's important to have some money on the table in that space.
Well, that's a big call. We know what the web's done. All right, the central bank, with the digital currency, they've obviously lost power. They've lost bank fees. A lot's been hurt. Why can't they bring this down?
Well, look, the regulatory community in the U.S. has already spoken about the allowability. Jerome Powell is on the record saying that it's a speculative asset, but he has no intent in bringing it down. I think you'll find it's almost going to be impossible now. The coin itself, Bitcoin, has reached escape velocity. If you've got 180 million people in a network, and that network is a private network, and it's totally decentralized, it'd be very, very hard to bring it down. You'd have to shut down the internet to bring it down. And so I don't think they can bring it down. I think they have to figure out a way to coexist with it. And if some of the real Bitcoin maximalists are correct, in a weird way, Bitcoin will be a corrective prescription for some of these central bankers. We've made a lot of money in the US. We've manufactured a lot of money in the last 18 months. So from April 1st of 2020, at the start of the COVID crisis, to today, we have a 42% increase in our money supply. So if you look at M2 measurable in the United States, we've picked up 42% more dollars than were ever in circulation at any year prior to that. Just looking at the math for this year, the United States has printed just under 700 billion US dollars. And so if you think of the magnitude of that, it will show up in the data. It will show up in inflation. You can't move the money supply to that degree without having it show up in the data, and it is showing up. And since you're bringing up some gold bugs there, like Jim Rickard, let me just go back 50 years ago. The United States, in trying to settle up the Bretton Woods Agreement, agreed to link our currency to gold. And I want to just remind everybody, 80 short years ago, Bretton Woods Conference, July of 1944, they couldn't agree. And why couldn't they agree? Well, John Maynard Keynes, the British economist, he wanted one currency. Why did he want one currency? He didn't want any one nation to game the currency, to devalue relative to others, so that the export markets would clear at fair prices. So the US said, okay, no problem. We're the largest economy. We'll take the mantle of this. We'll peg ourselves to $35 an ounce. We held that standard for 27 years, but in August of 1971, Richard Nixon broke from that. And Jim writes about this quite eloquently, Jim Rickards. The breaking from that and the devaluation of the US dollar led to this rampant inflation, rampant deficit spending. And today, the 2021 dollar has the purchasing power of $2. So $100 of today's money is worth about $2 of 1971's money. And so we've devalued ourselves by about 98%. And so that has consequences. It's crushed middle and lower middle income people in the United States. My father, as an example, his wages today, if you price that very same job, it would be down about 26.5%. So he can't put his family, can't put me and my brother and sister in the middle class. And that is a direct result of our monetary policy. So the Federal Reserve, what Bitcoin is signaling because of its scarcity and its impregnability, the Federal Reserve is getting a signal that, hey, you got to slow down the money printing because it's very corruptive and it's very debasing to the society long term. It's creating a lot of anger and a lot of populism and a lot of splits between the haves and the have-nots.
Is gold in trouble? Is cryptocurrency taking all the oxygen out of the room?
Well, listen, gold has been flat for the last decade. It's down this year. I would hate to say that it's in trouble because we've had 5,000 years where gold has been perceived to be a store of asset value. I would point out that its manufacturing value is probably only 5% of the overall $10 trillion market capitalization of gold. But I would say, no, gold is not in trouble because there is a very large group of people generationally that are in your and my generation that still see gold as a store of value. But on a relative basis to Bitcoin, I do think it's in trouble. I think Bitcoin will outperform gold because Bitcoin is has technological advances in terms of portability, ease of use, low cost transactional value. So I think Bitcoin will outperform gold, but I don't think gold is in trouble, meaning it's going to zero or something like that.
Look, we had Gerald Celente on. Do you know Gerald?
Yes.
Gerald said something interesting. He said a number of things. He said that, of course, he sees the world going into absolutely everything digital in the currency world. But of course, he was saying that cash is dead man walking. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, listen, I mean, I would be hard for me to believe that the governments are going to give up their franchise in the fiat currency business. So, it's a pretty bold statement. I was with Michael Saylor, the CEO of MicroStrategy. He made a very big investment in Bitcoin a year ago. He's now got over $7.5 billion worth of Bitcoin on his balance sheet as a result of current market prices. He's in Gerald's camp. He thinks that, Bitcoin becomes this $100 trillion asset and it replaces the currencies of the world. And the Lightning Network, of course, will help increase those transaction speeds. I'm less optimistic than that. I'm not a Bitcoin evangelist. I don't think that Jesus and Moses had a baby and they gave birth to the baby and named it Bitcoin. That's not me. I'm more of a practical person that recognizes that Bitcoin can evolve into a store of value. What I would caution people that make statements like that about, and I say this very humbly because I've been wrong about so many things, is that there are so many unknown unknowns. And if we think about it linearly, that may happen. But what we also know is that a lot of things happen that we don't anticipate. COVID, I don't think many of us anticipated. I could name so many different things. This whole mRNA technology that we're using for the vaccines, I don't think a lot of people anticipated or saw the promise of that when it was early stage being worked on. So it's very hard to say. There could be other technologies that are introduced that change the linear progression of that prediction. I'd be worried about that.
Look, speaking of the vaccine, and I'm going to ask you what your thoughts on the vaccine and the economy and going forward. And I did hear you make some comments over the last few months about this. But of course, we in Australia got bombarded with all of these crazy medical people sending out information that if you get the vaccine, within 2 years' time, people start dropping like flies and people will be dropping dead. Now, here we are, a few billion people have now taken the vaccine. We're 20 or 21 or 22 months down the road. They're not dropping like flies. So at any rate, What are your thoughts on the vaccine and
Well,
going?
you're going to get me in trouble now with a good portion of your listeners and viewers. So that's fine. I mean, I'm already in trouble anyway most of the time. So, I'm a big believer in leadership and bold leadership and making educated decisions and educated guesses on things. I would encourage people to read, and I brought props with me tonight. Scott Gottlieb's book, Uncontrolled Spread. He is the former FDA commissioner. I interviewed him on my Salt Talk series. I would also encourage people to read Walter Isaacson's book, Code Breakers, and to really understand and unlock what's going on with the technology that they've developed. And then once you understand it, I think you'd have great comfort that it's not going to kill us. It's not disrupting your DNA chain. It doesn't have any of these long-term consequences. And then I would also caution people that the West is up against it. We have our information technologies are being weaponized against us. If you were privy to a White House daily briefing, you would know that there's robotic technology designed by the Chinese and the Russians and our adversaries that are in your marketplace in Australia, here in the United States, UK, and France, designed to divide us and to disseminate large swaths of misinformation, disinformation, falsehoods, and tinfoil conspiracy theory to make people doubt the process. And so I would go back to the greatest generation of Australians or the greatest generation of Americans after the Second World War, when they had the choice to take the Jonas Salk polio vaccine, and the trust that we had in our institutions and the establishment at that time. And I think, unfortunately, we've lost our way a little bit. And I think that's a result of our political leadership. And it's a result of us not explaining to people the weapons grade propaganda that's been disseminated on our technological platforms known as social media. So for me, I tell people they got to get vaccinated if they want to work at Skybridge. I did a 2,400 person conference with very low breakthrough COVID numbers. I mean, minuscule, less than 4 people that I was aware of the 2,400 people got breakthrough COVID because we had a vaccine mandate. We had open spaces. I worked with Dr. Gottlieb on designing the conference. And so, yes, I'm a force behind this. I believe that we need these vaccines. You're not going to drop dead from the vaccine. These vaccine protocols are safe. To your point, billions of people have taken them, and they will be here 5 or 10 years from now. None of them will die from the vaccine. This is a hoax, and it's conspiratorial, but it is designed to weaken your country, and it is designed to weaken my country. And what I'm upset about is there are political leaders in my country that prey on people by pushing that information out there because they think it helps them politically, but it actually disunites the country. So I'm sorry I'm being so long-winded about that, but I'm a big proponent of these vaccines. I've gotten the 3rd shot myself, and I encourage people to please get these shots. You'll end the pandemic. There's more freedom with this vaccine, and there's more economic growth as a result of it.
Thank you. No, it's a
So
very
it's interesting. You didn't pull the plug on me. Yeah, you didn't unplug the electricity, so I'm still talking. But I don't know. I've been in situations where I've said that to people, they go crazy, and they run around in a circle. But were you vaccinated, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm actually booked in to get vaccinated tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Congratulations, and you'll be safe, and it'll be a good outcome for you.
Look, New South Wales is now like 92% of New South Wales, which is the largest state of people, and 92% is vaccinated for 1 dose. So I think Australia's got the message. But anyway, you won't be shot here.
All right. Well, that's good. You just told me that the Australians have a very high IQ, Greg. Okay, because I almost think it's like an IQ test at this point. If you don't mind me saying that.
That's okay. You probably have known. Look, Australians like to give and take, and we like a little bit of cheek. So you'll fit in perfectly. Hey, listen, can Donald Trump win the next election?
Well, no, he's not. Listen, I don't think he can win the next election. I think he could win the nomination of the Republican Party. There's no question about that. These guys are a bunch of babies, and he's a complete bully, and he could roll those people. But he won't run because he's seen the math that I've seen, and he has no path to win it. And I don't think he wants to be disgraced with another defeat. But I will say this to you and your listeners and viewers. This is the best money-making scheme that this guy has come up with in his whole life. I mean, he loses the election, he lies about the loss, and he raises himself $300 million in like 6 weeks. That's more money than he's made from reality television or from real estate. So I don't think he's coming off the juice anytime soon. I think he's going to play this gimmickry and gamesmanship on all these rubes to raise more money for himself, but he's not going to run for election, and he certainly couldn't win it if he did.
Look, my next comment, your wife may want to have me shot, but
Yeah,
I'm
go
going
ahead.
I'm going to be brave enough to say it.
Yeah, that's all right. Go
I've
ahead.
had the pleasure to investigate you in the last week. I certainly knew who you were. I'm a great watcher of 60 Minutes and all the programs, and I love watching the whole political war going on as while Trump was in power. But you know, I found looking at everything about you, you're very smart. You're a clear thinker and a clear speaker. You look good. You've got charm and charisma. You've peeped behind the curtain at the White House. What about running for president?
Running for president.
Yes.
Well, listen, an Italian, particularly an Italian American, we can probably survive 1 or 2 circumcisions, but we definitely cannot survive a castration. Okay. So, I don't feel like getting castrated. I mean, I got to tell you, she would kill me. Okay. Because they run you through the muck. And, I'll say this, and you guys have the same thing going on in your country. Not every single one of your politicians is stupid, but of course, every single one of them gets made out to be stupid by their opponent in these attack ads and all of the nonsense. And it just puts an enormous amount of pressure on your kids. And so having said all of that, if it were, a few years from now, my kids were a little older and I thought I could add some value to the process. I'm open-minded about political service, public service, because, and I'm not trying to say this melodramatically, and I'm not a politician, but I love the country. My life story, Greg, could have never happened in Italy or other countries. I grew up with little to no money. I went to Tufts and Harvard. There's enough meritocracy in the country where I was able to excel. And I would want to be a part of the policy-based solutions to continue that for people. But, I'm not the right politician for this time because I'm not polarizing. I want to be focused on left and right out the door, meaning enough with the left and right nonsense. Let's focus on what's right or wrong for the country. And so, I don't think we're ready for that. We're in this like politicized, polemical, polarized fever. And so I don't know where I would find a home in that environment. I don't think I could win the nomination even, but if the world changed a little and people were seismically thinking about long-term policy solutions, they were thinking about straight talking people who really cared, not straight talking narcissistic buffoonery, but like, people that really care. I'm open to it. And, if she's coming after me with a hatchet or a machete, I'm going to ask you to be my Secret Service person. I would want you to sacrifice yourself on my behalf.
Well, everybody, you've heard it first here on the GoCo Group's channel. You heard it. You heard what he had to say. That's amazing.
But and remember my condition, though. You're going to have to be my Secret Service. You're going to have to step in front of me when Mrs. Scaramucci's coming at me with a hatchet, okay?
Oh, Anthony, I'm happy to do that, but I may use you as my shield. Look, what I do like about you, Anthony, and I've always been a great people watcher, and you're very, very quick to look at both sides of the argument. As I've looked at everything you've done, that tells me that you're a man of great wisdom, and it would be nice to have somebody up there who at least showed a bit of wisdom, and to me that's important.
Well, now, listen, it's very kind of you, and I appreciate you saying that. It's very nice of you. And listen, I've had my shares of ups and downs in my life, and so I think that's also needed. You can't have people that are coming at that job with a level of arrogance. They need help in a job like that, and they need to be secure enough to delegate and to reach out to get as many hands into the situation as possible.
Yeah, well, I saw you interviewed by some crazy people, and you didn't waver, and you held your line, and it was really good. You could have just headbutted them because they were being completely arseholes, but you held your line, and you held your demeanor. Very good, outstanding.
Well, I appreciate that, sir. Thank you.
Listen, let's have a bit of fun. You ready for this? Okay, because we're
Yeah, go
coming to
ahead.
time's up, but I could talk to you forever. You're
Well,
a
I
champion.
appreciate being here.
Yeah. Okay, just a couple of words. We're going to say a few things here. You ready?
Okay, go
Okay,
ahead.
just quick answer, but Hillary Clinton,
Over ambitious,
Steve Bannon,
nut job,
cryptocurrency,
transforming the world,
gold,
neutral,
Dow Jones,
50,000.
marriage,
You got to marry the right person. You got to marry up. You got to be lucky enough to marry up. I was lucky enough to marry up, but you got to marry the right person. And here's something I will say. It's a little long-winded. My wife and I almost got divorced when I was in the White House, well documented in the tabloids. And if you really love somebody, work on the marriage. We have two beautiful kids. We worked on our marriage. I think we're closer today than we were even before the threatening of divorce. And so we had a spill in our marriage, and we didn't dispose of each other. And so I would just caution people, try to work on things, work things out if you can, particularly if there's love there.
Okay, Donald Trump,
It's a jackass. I mean, come on, he is an ignorant jackass who has no executive management skills. And I'll just point this out to you. Unless you worked at Goldman Sachs like Gary Cohn and Mnuchin, if you had your own money or you had your own career like me, Mattis, Kelly, Tillerson, H.R. McMaster, you told the truth about how dangerous he was.
Rudy Giuliani,
Feel bad, I'm close to Rudy. I've known Rudy my whole life. There's an expression in Italian, tutte pazzo, which means he has a chicken running inside his head right now. I don't know what the hell this guy's doing, but I'd like to remember Rudy Giuliani for helping us during 9/11 and for helping clean up our great city when we needed him, not the version of Rudy that we're watching today with the hair dye dripping off his face and all the nonsense.
and yeah, that was bad. That was bad. Look, and lastly, Australia.
Well, I love Australia. You've got an amazing continent. I'm not just saying that because I'm speaking in Australia. As I mentioned, I've spent a lot of time in your beautiful cities. I said something 10 years ago, which I'll say today. When you have a northern power that is in great need of rare earth resources and commodities and oil and cattle and all the great things that Australia has, they're going to flex on you. And at that time in 2012, when I said that at the Australian Davos Forum in Hayman in the resort community there was a pushback from some of the Australian diplomats. It was like, oh, no, we're super friendly with the Chinese, and this is a very benign and diplomatic relationship. And, it was a wolf in sheep's clothing. And so, when we put U.S. Marines in Darwin several years ago, and by the way, Barack Obama made that decision, we did it for a reason. You have a northern power and a southern country that has commodities. The northern power comes down on that country. Go look at what the UK or Great Britain did to Africa 150 years ago. So to me, I love the Australians, and I want the West to be committed to the defense of Australia, particularly the United States. And I want the English-speaking people to stay unified, whether it's the Australians, the UK, the US, or Canada. And I think it's a super important strategic asset for the West, the Australians, despite that all your ancestors were in a prison, and you all try to pretend that you're from Great Britain and none of you were in a prison. I mean, that's sort of the joke down there. But despite all that, okay, I have an enormous amount of respect for what you've done in that country. And I hope the United States and Australia, there's never any daylight between the two nations. That's my wish and my hope. But I think we're in a cautious time and we have to bind together. That's my honest assessment of what's going on.
Anthony, our time has run out. Yes, my ancestors from my grandmother's side was a crim in jail, come out from England. So
All
thank
right,
you
see
for
that
that.
little bit of openness. I mean, come on,
Yeah.
I'm sure I had that in my life. What the hell you think they were running out of Italy for?
Yeah.
They weren't running out of Italy because they were in castles. I can tell you that, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony, great to have you on the program. I think you have a tremendous 25 years ahead of you. I think you're going to be dynamic, you're going to be special, and I know that you're going to make a big impression on the world. Thank you for
Well,
being
I hope
with
so,
us on
sir.
the show.
Listen, I love people, and I appreciate you bringing me on. I hope we'll get the chance to meet in person when this pandemic ends. And it's very kind of you to say that. And I wish I had recorded this for my wife. I would have cut out the certain parts of it, but some of the stuff you said, I would want her to hear. I'm very grateful to you. It's very nice of you.
Well, that's okay. We have recorded it and we'll get a copy to you. Okay. Good on you. Well, thank you very much for being on
Thank
the
you again.
program.
It's great to be here with you. Thank you.